can't call yourself a team when you're missing one. You can't make them believe when shit ain't getting done. You can't be making a scene when all you do is run. Fighting your right in the scope, sight of a loaded gun. You look at weak, don't even try to pretend that you're rough and just as tough as when you're missing a friend. Attack and take a back when the team isn't whole. You got a hole in your soul, step up to your fucking role. We might get hurt, you might be taking some hits, but when you're taking a breath, then that's some personal shit. Just know we fought together and we got this far, cause the team is stronger than the sum of the parts. Nobody can escape this fight. Nobody's gonna dim my light. Nobody's gonna die. Dream that you see and sink. Got a lust to bust another quick and drink. You know for certain when your friend is down and hurt, you can wait another day. Look away, I'm pulling back the curtain. You can't call yourself a team when you're missing one. You can't make them believe when shit ain't getting done. You can't be making a scene when all you do is run. Fighting your right in the scope, sight of a loaded gun. You look at weak, don't even try to pretend that you're rough and just as tough as when you're missing a friend. Attack and take a back when the team isn't whole. You got a hole in your soul, step up to your fucking role. We might get hurt, you might be taking some hits, but when you're taking a breath, then that's some personal shit. Just know we fought together and we got this far, cause the team is stronger than the sum of the parts. Nobody can escape this fight. Nobody's gonna dim my light. Nobody's gonna die tonight. Nobody's getting left behind. I got your back and we made it this far, cause the team is stronger than the sum of the parts. Nobody's gonna die tonight. Nobody's getting left behind. Standing alone, you're in a zone you should never be. Die crying silent, insanity. With nobody there to stand by your side, you can try to fight alone, but the odds will leave you terrified. Got a team with the best bets to fight the rest. Got a team with the smart, strong, the sturdiest. Got a team with the fights beaten in the chest. Never beware or be scared, they're not the worthiest. So watch the six and be ready for war. With our talents combined, we're an unstoppable force. Boots hitting the ground before a fighting in form. As a unit of one, we're taking armies by storm. Stick with us and keep the team in your sights. We'll be working as one and we'll be winning this fight. Just know we fought together and we got this far, cause the team is stronger than the sum of the parts. Nobody can escape this fight. Nobody's gonna dim my light. Nobody's gonna die tonight. Nobody's getting left behind. I got your back and we made it this far, cause the team is stronger than the sum of the parts. Nobody's gonna die tonight. Nobody's getting left behind.
Sometimes you realize that the lover's hate and the honest lying. Sometime you will find that the world you're living in is in disguise.
You paid all your debts, you gave it your best. Swimming in praise, but you're afraid of the slip, and you're afraid of the fall.
Sometimes you realize that the lovers hate and the honest lie. Sometimes you will find that the world you're living in is in disguise. Try yourself while you're sitting, crying, lying to yourself that it's not okay. Tell the world your old self is dying while the man you are still paving the way. Living, loving, you're the man is always trying to be. Questioning your own spot in the sky, you're the only one that's in the dark to see. You spent your life always doing it right, but let yourself fall down today. It's not all gone from a single wrong. Accept your faults and learn to say. Sometimes you realize that the lovers hate and the honest lie. Sometimes you will find that the world you're living in is in disguise.
See, there's a point in everyone's life when they come to the realization that everyone is hiding something, whether it's pain, fear, regret, or simply the truth. And mostly it's from themselves.
You're chancing it all, unwinnable bets. I'm playing a game, always want my regret. I like that it's haunting my chance of a fall. The people who know you don't know you at all. You're a saint, a whole battle within that's losing. If you can't just let the truth, then you'll be told when a single mistake gets around that the man you built up will start crumbling down.
Sometimes you realize that the lovers hate and the honest lie. Sometimes you will find that the world you're living in is in disguise.
Feels like the weight of the world on me. It feels like I'm trapped where I don't wanna be. It feels like I'm regretting just where I've been. It feels like another day goes dripping away with the same feel of hate and disdain for another blame that you dropped on your back like a silent attack to everything that you.
I'm deafened.
What's wrong?
Shut up. We're live. Alright. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Nightfall. My name is Joshua T. Stewart, otherwise known as Callan Zooling 4968, and I am joined today by my good friend Tristin Chambers, aka Change the God.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
And tonight we have a very different type of episode that we want to talk about, or we want to discuss, or at least do. This episode of Welcome to Nightfall is going to be a pseudo pilot episode, a backdoor pilot episode towards something that we have been, that me and Tristan here have been discussing. I would like to say at length, but honestly, not really. So
Yeah.
here's the deal. Tonight's episode of Welcome to Nightfall is called Danger Zone. It's a backdoor pilot for an upcoming series that should take place monthly, where me and Tristan talk about some of the greatest and darkest stories, true crime stories to ever happen in the world of professional wrestling. That includes scandals from WWE, WCW, ECW, AEW, Ring of Honor, Impact, and New Japan Pro Wrestling. All across the world, professional wrestling has had its fair share of hits and misses, but tonight we're going to start talking about one of the greatest and worst cases, the true crime cases in all pro wrestling history. Before we get into the episode, I want to announce that on Friday, March 4th, we are releasing the first episode of another new podcast that we're debuting. It's called Steel Casket Underground. It is hosted by Mac Advertisement, aka Tyler Stroud from The Satellite, and he's going to be interviewing underground musicians from around the world, starting out with Spencer Crewe of the band 1551, who you may know if you are a big Rooster Teeth fan, or at least a fan of Achievement Hunter Jeremy Dooley. And we've been able to get Spencer onto the show, so Steel Casket will be premiering exclusively on Spotify on Friday. And we also would like to say that we will be premiering a brand new 1551 song for the first time in its entirety live on Steel Casket Underground this Friday. So please tune into that. On Sunday night, me and Lex66 are doing a special second part episode to Through the Breach, where we will be discussing The Batman. Part 2, where we dive deep into the Batman animated series, Batman Beyond, all the related animated series and movies. We already talked about the movies on this last episode, but now that hopefully we'll have both seen The Batman by this point on Sunday, we will be able to talk a little bit about the movie, hopefully not too bad in spoilers. So, Through the Breach, The Batman episode part 2, premiering on Sunday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube. Also, next Monday, Through the Breach returns to its normal schedule, where me and a bunch of the Netflix cast will be talking about the Transformers franchise. We're talking about the new movie coming out next year, and talking about the movies that have already come out, from Transformers 2007 all the way to Bumblebee that came out in 2018, talking about the various television series and other classic media, and as well as the toys. Now, that will be happening next Monday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube. And next Wednesday on, hold on, let me double check my calendar here to make sure. Next Wednesday on March 9th, welcome to the Nightfall returns to its normal schedule, where we will be talking about a completely different case. We will be talking about the Black Dahlia murders. So next Wednesday, we're going to be talking about Black Dahlia on Welcome to Nightfall, and that's pretty much everything we got to talk about regarding our upcoming schedule for this next week. So if you are interested in any of those topics, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and all that. And without further ado, let's get into the Danger Zone.
So,
On
Luke,
June 20th. What?
oh, I was just saying, absolutely. Like, let's just hop into this.
All right. Serious moment. On June 25th, 2007, former WWE superstar Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy, and their son Daniel Benoit were found dead in their home in Fayette, Georgia. Benoit, a very popular professional wrestler in the World Wrestling Entertainment business, WWE, would later be found to have committed the double murder suicide. Beloved by many, fans and friends alike, what drove one of the best professional wrestlers in the world to commit these unspeakable crimes? Join us as Welcome to the Nightfall presents Danger Zone. Before we begin, we must express that this episode will feature graphic descriptions of the deaths of Nancy, Daniel, and Chris Benoit, and will also discuss the nature of physical injury and its relationship with mental health. Opinions presented in this episode are those of the cast members, unless otherwise stated. While this case is considered solved, there are some that believe that this case was staged. Viewer discretion is advised.
Awesome. So I think the best way to start this is by giving people a little bit of an idea as to who Chris Benoit was prior to this horrific accident. And, as you mentioned, he was
We
one
should
of the.
give him a bit of a biography.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do here. Essentially, he was a wrestler from Montreal, Quebec, Canada, who over 22 years worked with WCW, ECW, New Japan Pro Wrestling, and most notably WWE, and was known by many different names. I think most people knew him obviously by his real name, but people also knew him as the Pegasus Kid in the early days. He held 22 different championships between WWE, WCW, New Japan, and ECW. And he also headlined multiple pay-per-views, including a main event of a WrestleMania back in 2004. Now, I don't know too much about his earlier days with wrestling, but
I can fill in that. I can fill in that with some of the articles I have here.
absolutely.
Alright, so Benoit was born in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, the son of Michael and Margaret Benoit. He grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, from where he was billed throughout the bulk of his career. He had a sister living near Edmonton. During his childhood and early adolescence in Edmonton, Benoit idolized Tom Dynamite Kid Billington and Bret the Hitman Hart. At 12 years old, he attended a local wrestling event at which the two performers stood out above everyone else. And if you know the history of Bret the Hitman Hart, you would all probably agree. He is considered one of the greatest and most talented wrestlers in the history of pro wrestling from the 90s and even the early 2000s.
I would just like to interject, and I think most wrestling fans will agree with me that Bret Hart is the best there was, and the best there ever will be.
Yes, indeed. Let's see. Benoit trained to become a professional wrestler in the Hart family dungeon, receiving education from family patriarch Stu Hart. And in ring, Benoit emulated both Billington and Bret Hart, cultivating a high-risk style and physical appearance more reminiscent of the former.
Bless you.
Where the fuck did I come from?
I think it's also important to lay out to everyone that the Hart Dungeon is probably one of the most prolific places in wrestling culture. It was actually in the basement of the Hart family house in Canada, where a lot of wrestlers, including like Chris Jericho, Natalia, and a ton of other wrestlers over the decades trained out of. And it was a very prolific I don't want to say wrestling facility, but definitely a really good place where people went to train and wrestle and learn the ins and outs.
It's a notable gym that pretty much taught a lot of people, a lot of the wrestlers working in the 90s and 2000s, essentially how to be a professional wrestler.
Yes.
And it really succeeded because Chris Benoit is a very notable and talented technical wrestler.
Sure.
To the point where later in his career, he eventually adopted the trademark sharpshooter submission maneuver created by Bret the Hitman Hart.
Yes.
That's a lot of good information about his childhood. However, so we'll get into more of his career now. So starting in 1985, Chris Benoit went and joined Stampede Wrestling, which was Stu Hart's wrestling promotion. From the beginning, similarities between Benoit and Billington were apparent, as Benoit adopted many of his moves, such as the diving headbutt and the snap suplex. The homage was complete with his initial billing as Dynamite Chris Benoit. According to Benoit, in his first match, he attempted a diving headbutt before learning how to land correctly and had the wind knocked out of him. He said he would never do the move again at that point.
And this will certainly come back full circle when we talk about the tragedy that happened, because it's alleged that this has some involvement. I don't want to give enough away right now, but I do want to just point that out.
Right. So yes. So in order to establish the timeline of how the case unfolded, you have to kind of understand where they came from. Like Chris Benoit, I think at this point it is worth mentioning that he was a technical wrestler and he was a dedicated and loyal wrestler to the point where he would do any shows even if he was sick. He was very very loyal to the promotion because he enjoyed the sport so much. I think it's safe to say that.
Absolutely.
So yeah, in 1985 to 1989, he was in Stampede Wrestling. He joined New Japan in 1986 and continued to perform for New Japan up till 1997. While with New Japan Pro Wrestling (NJPW), he came into his own as a performer in critically acclaimed matches with luminaries such as Jushin Thunder Liger, Shunsuro Ogani, Black Tiger, and El Samurai in their junior heavyweight division. But let's keep a focus on Black Tiger there for a moment, because if I remember correctly, because in New Japan Pro Wrestling, he met fellow technical wrestler and all-around superstar Eddie Guerrero.
The legendary Eddie Guerrero.
Mr. Lie, Cheat, and Steal himself.
I didn't always know him as that. I knew him from the whole Viva La Raza gimmick. But
right.
To each their own.
But yeah, so to understand this case better, you also have to understand who Eddie Guerrero is, because when Chris Benoit initially joined WWE, he was brought over alongside Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Let's see. So just know that Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero had known each other for a very, very long time, from before their days in WCW or WCW.
Yes.
It appears that Benoit first came to World Championship Wrestling, also known as WCW, in 1992, teaming up with fellow Canadian wrestler Biff Wellington for the NWA World Tag Team Championship Tournament, but were defeated by Brian Pillman and Jushin Thunder Liger in the first round of the Clash of Champions 19. I will say that I do want to eventually look at the story of Brian Pillman for a future episode of Danger Zone, so keep an eye on him. If you want to learn a little bit more about him, we'll be doing an episode on him hopefully within the next couple of months.
Absolutely.
However, Benoit did not return to WCW until January 1993 at Clash of the Champions 22, defeating Brad Armstrong. A month later, at Super Brawl 3, he lost to Too Cold Scorpio, getting pinned with only 3 seconds left in a 20-minute time limit. At the same time, he formed a tag team with Bobby Eaton, and he and Eaton lost to Scorpio and Marcus Bagwell at Slamboree, Benoit deciding to go back to Japan.
Yep.
Then, in August 1994, Benoit began a partnership with ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling, which is probably one of the more entertaining wrestling promotions at the time.
So, to interject, the reason why ECW was so entertaining. Now, again, I wasn't born till '99, so I only have the archive footage to to really
Yeah,
go
I was
to.
born in '97.
But essentially, ECW, sorry, was really like this fringe alternative, but at the same time mainstream wrestling promotion. Kind of led by Paul Heyman. Many who know him from Brock Lesnar and working with Roman Reigns and other
And
superstars.
working with CM Punk, we can't forget he worked with CM Punk.
That is true. Yes. And so ECW was kind of the alternative at that time, where it was very violent. Like, that is where you saw like barbed wire matches, and I don't think that they ever introduced elements of fire. They probably did, but at the same time, also, they were a lot more vulgar in the ring. I mean, there's a very infamous promo that not Chris Benoit didn't do, but it was someone else, where they just basically laid out like an entire WWE roster verbally that happened to be in the building. And it's quite notable. I believe it was Paul Heyman when ECW came back.
I remember that. I remember him giving a promo for One Night Stand whenever they were
Yes.
doing out that specific
When it was
pay-per-view, like him
yeah.
laying out JBL, him laying out Edge, and
Yeah,
all of him.
yeah, because he did the whole the only reason you were WWE champion for a year was Triple H didn't want to work Tuesdays. And
You still need to go back and rewatch that whole pay-per-view.
yeah,
That thing was
I highly suggest, like, if you guys want to see like the old days of like wrestling when it used to be fun, definitely go watch some like the ECW stuff. You'll definitely fall in love with it.
I'm not even go so far as to say go watch the Attitude Era WWE, because that's where you'll see like the origins of Stone Cold Steve Austin, the origins of obviously Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero. You'll
Mhm.
see the origins of like the American Badass Undertaker. You get to see the
Well, I think
amazing
like a
story
lot
arc.
of the WCW and ECW content, if it's not on YouTube, is stuck on what used to be the WWE network.
Rest in peace.
I believe it's still stuck there unless they didn't fully integrate it with Peacock or whatever.
I think
But
they did actually.
yeah, that's right. But going from where we were, so can continue as you were.
Okay, so so Benoit joined ECW in 1994, and he was booked as a dominant wrestler, gaining notoriety as the Crippler, where you put Rocco Rock out. In his first appearance, Benoit competed in a one-night eight-man tag team tournament for the vacant NWA World Heavyweight Championship, losing again to Too Cold Scorpio in the quarterfinals.
Another thing is, this is something I noticed because I also watched the Dark Side of the Ring episode, but he wasn't just known as the Crippler, but he was actually known as the Canadian Crippler.
Yeah.
I don't know if they gave him that Canadian aspect before he went into like WCW or back to WCW or when he got into WWE, but I know, okay, no, in 1995, yeah, they changed it to Canadian Crippler Chris Benoit. That's right. So I knew it was somewhere in there. I was confused, like why it was just saying Crippler.
All right,
Because
we got some. Okay, I got some more notable information about his time with ECW.
Sure.
At November to Remember, Benoit accidentally broke Sabu's neck within the opening seconds of the match. The injury came when Benoit threw Sabu with the intention that he take a face first pancake bump. A bump, for those wondering, is essentially when a wrestler takes a hit. Like they get thrown to the mat, they actually get punched or something. It's basically them putting over the other guy's moves, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
Okay. So but Sabu had attempted to turn mid-air and take a backdrop bump instead. He did not achieve full rotation and landed almost directly on his neck. After this match, Benoit was seen returning to the locker room and breaking down over the possibility that he might have paralyzed someone. Paul Heyman, the head booker of ECW at the time, came up with the idea of continuing the Crippler moniker for Benoit. From that point until his departure from ECW, he was known as Crippler Benoit. When he returned to WCW in October 1995, WCW modified his ring name to the Canadian Crippler Chris Benoit. In the Rise and Fall of ECW book, Heyman commented that he planned on using Benoit as a dominant heel for quite some time before putting the company's main title, the ECW World Heavyweight Championship, on him to be the long-term champion of the company. In ECW, Benoit first met Dean Malenko and won the ECW World Tag Team Championships with him, and it was considered Benoit's first American title. And he beat Sabu and Taz in February 1995 at Return of the Funker. After winning, they were initiated into the Triple Threat stable led by ECW World Heavyweight Champion Shane Douglas as Douglas's attempt to recreate the Four Horsemen, as the three-man contingency held all three of the ECW championships at the time, with Malenko also holding the ECW World Television Championship. So, yeah. We'll skip ahead a bit because I don't want this to be entirely about Chris Benoit's biography.
So, do you just want to move in then to what happened?
I don't want to move into what happened because there's other information we gotta do. So I think we should move more into talking about his time in WWE because that's really where all of this kicks off.
Absolutely. So I would like to kick off with this, I guess.
Go right ahead. I gotta get a drink anyway.
So Benoit debuted originally in what was known as the WWF under a group called the Radicals, and it was Chris Saturn, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, and Dean Malenko. They eventually aligned themselves with Triple H, and within literally a month, Chris Benoit won his first title at WrestleMania 2000 to win the Intercontinental Championship, and then eventually also challenged The Rock for the WWF Championship, and did multiple other WWF pay-per-view main events. Eventually, over time, he also entered into a feud with one Lionheart Chris Jericho, and eventually he went into some other feuds with people like Kurt Angle and Edge, and then also he, along with Chris Jericho, defeated Stone Cold Steve Austin and Triple H for the WWF Tag Team Champions in a little thing that used to be known as Raw is War, which was a special that they did at the time for Monday Night Raw. Additionally, he did some other different storylines. And then in 2003, he was actually picked as the third wrestler as part of the first WWF draft at the time. He also did different, feuds with other wrestlers like Rob Van Dam, and several others for sure. But over time, definitely became one of the most well-known wrestlers in WWE. Was involved in Royal Rumbles and, again, multiple different WrestleMania cards, even if it wasn't a main event specifically. And then overall, he lost in the final match to Eddie Guerrero at Vengeance. He lost in the final match, I think, of Vengeance to Eddie Guerrero.
That's better. That's easier to say.
Yeah, well, the wording is a little bit off. And then eventually, he qualified in the Royal Rumble and won and gained a title shot at WrestleMania 20 and became he became only the second performer in WWE to win the Royal Rumble at number 1, and eventually would go on to win the World Heavyweight Champion by making Triple H tap out to the Crippler Crossface.
I want to jump in right here and say something real quick.
Absolutely.
So if you look at WWE's records, there's only 3 current wrestlers who have won from the number 1 spot in the Royal Rumble. That those being Shawn Michaels, Steve Austin, and Edge, who recently won the Royal Rumble. I believe not this year, but last year, right?
Don't know. So I know he was in the Royal Rumble 3 different times.
Yeah, it was 2021 because 2020 is the year he came back.
Okay, so I'm trying to see here. So yeah, so he did win the 2001 from. No, actually, he didn't even start out at number 1.
So
He,
2020 in 2021 one he did.
well, no, he came out at number 27. What I'm saying is that he was the only wrestler besides Shawn Michaels to come out at number 1 and win the Royal Rumble. So, like, basically, he came out at number 1, lasted the entire way through.
That's what I'm trying to say. Edge did that in 2021.
I don't believe Edge did.
Yeah, he did, because I remember watching that whole pay-per-view. Let me look it up. Royal Rumble
Royal
20.
Rumble 21. Let me see. No, because number 1 was Bayley.
Think about what you just said.
Edge didn't come in until. I'm trying to see here.
In the main event of the 2021 Royal Rumble, 30-man Royal Rumble.
Okay, yes. Sorry, I was looking at the women's thing. My apologies. So,
I know you were. I was waiting for how long it would take you to fucking realize that.
I didn't
Yes,
watch that.
no, Edge
I
didn't come out
didn't
number 1.
watch
Number
the
1
Royal
was
Rumble that
Bayley.
year. Okay, my
Who's
favorite
number 1?
wrestling show was dead by the Royal Rumble of 2021. Okay, but okay, so I apologize. He is one of 3
Yes,
people to
yes. Bayley was the
win
number 1 entrant into the men's Royal Rumble in
at the time. Here, at the time, he was the second only performer to win the Royal Rumble. There we go.
there.
We stopped your semantics. All right.
Well, okay, what I'm trying to get at is that WWE, after the whole scandal, has essentially erased Chris Benoit
Yeah,
from history.
we'll talk about that. Okay.
Right. We'll get to that point. So, I mean, you mentioned the fact that Chris Benoit is one of the few wrestlers to ever start the Royal Rumble and last to the very end. So, I wanted to mention that if you go to look it up, WWE will not say that because of certain issues that we'll discuss in a little bit.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
just to go over some of the last things, though, is he also in 2004 defeated Randy Orton for the World Heavyweight Championship as well, then teamed with William Regal against Ric Flair and Batista. He also did a couple of other things, such as Survivor Series with Randy Orton's team, and which the team he was on won, and also fought against Edge at New Year's Revolution in a Elimination Chamber match which both of them lost. And then also did a Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania 21, which Edge actually beat Benoit by knocking him off the ladder and smashing his arm with a chair, which is just absolutely brutal. And then
note the chair, because that will come up in a little bit.
Sure.
But we should also
at Backlash that same year, one with a brick shot to the back of Benoit's head as well, which probably will come into play as well. Now,
you should probably mention WrestleMania 20 a little bit, because
I already did. I talked about the whole thing.
I know, but you didn't really mention the big storyline for that night. So, because it's kind of relevant to what happened.
Okay.
So, WrestleMania 20, the big main event of that one, the two title matches for WrestleMania 20. Hold on, let me pull up the card. It was the World Heavyweight Championship match between Triple H, Shawn Michaels, and Chris Benoit, with Benoit winning the match. However, the main event for that night for the WWE Championship was Eddie Guerrero versus who was it?
I don't know.
Let's see, main event match.
It doesn't say it on the article page, so I assume you'd have to. Who is it? He beat Kurt Angle.
Kurt Angle, yeah. Eddie Guerrero won his first championship at WrestleMania 20, and which at the very end of the night, you would see Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero, who at the time were really, really good friends. A lot of the times you would see them together in real life doing their things. They were very close friends. So whenever you saw Chris Benoit come out at the end of WrestleMania 20 and hug and celebrate with Eddie Guerrero, this pretty much started a trend within WrestleMania where at every decade, at WrestleMania 20 or WrestleMania 30, it would be built like the heels were going to win the matches going into like SummerSlam or whatever, but in reality, the fan favorites would win. At that point, it was Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero, and in WrestleMania 30, which happened which happened 10 years later. You got to see Daniel Bryan come out and beat Triple H, Randy Orton, and Batista for the Unified World Heavyweight Championship. That was WrestleMania 30, and so on and so forth. We've seen that trend.
It wasn't a Unified Heavyweight Championship. It was just for the World Heavyweight Championship.
Well, I consider it the Unified because he had both belts, both versions of the belt. So,
Daniel Bryan, no. At WrestleMania 30, no, he didn't.
He had the original World Heavyweight Championship, and he had the new version of it, which was just the WWE logo. You literally see in his celebration him holding up two different versions of the World Heavyweight title. I'm trying to think that maybe I have
no, because I'm checking here. He only won the World Heavyweight Championship once. I don't know if about the WWE Championship. And I can.
I know he became Universal Heavyweight Champion with
so
I like how we're getting off topic here. Like,
we absolutely are. Okay.
Topic for later. Let's get into how Chris Benoit killed his entire family.
All right. So yes, All right. Now the biggest thing that I do want to just state before we go into the actual thing is one important thing, like we mentioned, which is the relationship between Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero. In November,
at this point is where this all begins. The death of Eddie Guerrero is where all of this.
I want to get into it specifically. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
In November 13th, 2005, Eddie Guerrero was found dead in his hotel room. The following night, they held a tribute hosted by both Raw and SmackDown wrestlers. Because of Chris Benoit being, Eddie Guerrero's best friend, he was devastated and very emotional, eventually breaking down on camera as well. And this was a really big thing as well. This was something that shocked a lot of people because it was a drug overdose. That
Which will come back later.
Yeah. And then lastly, leading into this, he was supposed to defend the World Heavyweight Championship to do the ECW World Championship at Vengeance because ECW had been brought into WWE at that time.
Right, so we should also mention the match itself to kind of give people an idea of what the hell was going on at the time. So at this time, it's 2007. It's the rebranding, restart of ECW before after, and it's more PG era friendly version. So you have Chris Benoit, who is going to defend his title at Vengeance against
Johnny Nitro.
And he no Johnny Nitro is the one who replaced him in that match.
Yeah, it would have been CM Punk. Yes,
yes,
that's
CM
correct.
Punk. However, 24 hours before the pay-per-view started,
he told the WWE that his wife and son were vomiting.
No. He didn't tell the WWE. He told Chavo Guerrero Jr.
It says that he missed the weekend house shows, telling WWE officials his wife and son were vomiting blood due to food poisoning.
I don't remember that being discussed, but you know what? I'll defer to you. I just know that he texted Chavo Guerrero Jr. on because Chavo, I think it was Chavo and I can't remember who it was he was supposed to be in the car with at that point, but they were waiting to pick him up from the airport. He texted them, said that Nancy and Daniel.
Yeah, well, that was at 3:30 for that night's house show, but that's completely different from this is before the house shows. So he had told the WWE officials, then he told Chavo. Okay.
Right.
When he failed to show up for the pay-per-view, people were told that it was a family emergency, and then he was replaced by Johnny Nitro. Now we can get into what really happened, which is probably one of the saddest moments in humanity and not just all right. But
I'm going to jump in and turn this into a Nightfall episode for a few minutes here.
Absolutely.
Now we have to have pretty much a timeline of events.
Absolutely.
So, for the record, this is all happening on a weekend on between June 22nd and June 25th. June 22nd being that Friday, and the 25th being that Monday.
Yes.
So on June 22nd, I believe at that point officials started hearing rumors about Nancy Benoit and Daniel Benoit having food poisoning.
Yes.
Then the next day, Benoit tells
Chavo Guerrero.
Benoit tells Chavo about what's going on, and Chavo starts getting worried about his tone and demeanor. That was at 3:30 p.m. on Saturday, June 23rd,
And
2007.
now I would like to get into what that voice message was, because they talked about this in The Dark Side of the Ring, which you can watch it. You can watch it on Hulu. If
you can also watch it on Tubi TV.
Yeah, that too.
That's just free, by the way, but with ads.
Yes, exactly.
Not sponsored.
But essentially, what worried Chavo was that Chris was not a very emotional guy, and had basically told Chavo, like, "Hey, Chavo, I love you," and Chavo blew it off as like, "Oh, I love you too," and he's like, "No, like, I love you, dude." Like, very serious, like, very emotionally deep, like, "I love you." Like
emotionally driven, person to person, like, you're a member of my family, I love you, dude.
Yeah, like, it was basically like that, and then he also had to call him back and, left a message where it's like, "Hey, are you okay, man?" Like, that that didn't sound too good, he immediately kinda got worried, because again, like, Chris was not really like that. Eventually he called Guerrero back, stating that he had not answered the call because he was on the phone with Delta, and that he had a stressful day. Or no, okay, so no, actually, sorry. It was before that, actually. So the whole tone and demeanor was before that, but essentially had said at 3:44, so about 15 minutes later, that Chavo, I love you, and he actually said that Benoit sounded off when he talked to him, especially when he said "I love you" as an emphasis, because again, Chris was not very a super like emotional guy to most people. So
I think the first time that people really saw his emotion was on the tribute show for Eddie Guerrero, because it's the first time fans see him when he's not in his wrestling persona, and he's literally breaking down and crying on screen because of how close they were.
Now, it's not necessarily said what happened leading into it. There are some possible motives which we can get into after the timeline here. But on Friday, June 22nd, 2007, Chris killed his wife, Nancy, in an upstairs bedroom. And
following an argument.
Well, perceived to be an argument. Again, nobody's really like
no one really knows what happened.
No, nobody knows for sure what happened, and that's why I want to talk about it when we get to the motives.
All right, so I'm taking over from here on.
Okay.
All right, so I didn't want to announce how that she was dead yet, because the timeline of events, I'm trying to tell it as a story where you go in from people on the outside, like, what the hell is going on? We don't know where Chris is. We don't know what's going on. Them investigating how that happens. So eventually they have a. Okay, so let me do this. So first of all, yes, Nancy and Daniel are dead. I'll get into how they died here in a minute. So Sunday rolls around. Benoit isn't at the pay-per-view. The next morning, no one's heard from him. So WWE sends a wellness check to his home in Fayette, Georgia, to find out if he's okay, because no one's heard from him. They go there, and they hear nothing in the house. They have no reason to enter the house. The dog is outside. That's also something that we need to mention, that he told Chavo, because he said to Chavo that he had his dog chained up outside, and it was safe and could be moved whenever ready.
Well,
like, for no apparent reason, changed.
So it wasn't just Chavo Guerrero, but it was also Scott Armstrong, who
Scott Armstrong,
that said the family's dogs were in an enclosed pool area, and a garage side door had been left open.
Right. So that definitely added to Chavo and Scott Armstrong's suspicions regarding his well-being. So the police show up at his house on Monday morning, June 25th. They show up at his house. They can't get in. Dogs are outside in the pool enclosed area. They're not allowed to go in unless something is seriously wrong. That's basically the law of the area. A neighbor comes by and asks, "Hey, what's going on?" They explain the situation, and she's like, "Okay, well, the dogs know me. Let me go take them inside." Yeah. She goes in. Takes a suspiciously long amount of time, and then runs out of the house crying, saying, who was it that she found? Was it Daniel, or was it?
Yeah, Daniel.
Yeah. She found the dead body of Daniel Benoit, who was laying face down on his bed, smothered to death, with a knife somewhat haphazardly hidden underneath his bed, a kitchen knife.
Yes.
Investigators investigating the property immediately locked it off as a crime scene and found the dead body of Nancy Benoit in an upstairs bedroom. In the rest of the house, he eventually found Chris Benoit, who was hanging from one of his weight sets with a rope tied around his neck, also dead from an apparent suicide.
Yes.
Later investigation revealed that on Friday, June 22nd, Chris Benoit had killed his wife, Nancy, wrapping her up in, what was it, a towel, I think he mentioned?
It was wrapped up in a towel, and then a copy of the Bible was left next to her.
That's something else we need to mention. We'll mention that.
I think it was left next to her and Daniel, but not Chris. I could be wrong, but from what I remember, there wasn't a Bible next to Chris, but there was next to Nancy and Daniel. Another thing as well to point out, that's even worse in the Daniel case, was that he was sedated with Xanax and also had Fragile X syndrome, which was a cause of a lot of domestic problems. Because there were also needle marks, which were the result of growth hormones given to him because Benoit and his family considered him to be undersized. But eventually he came out and said that he didn't have it, but at the time that people were grasping at straws. But even Chris Jericho said that if Chris had wanted to keep something to himself, that you wouldn't have been able to pry anything out of him.
Right.
So that eventually, and then eventually as well, family did confirm that he had no existing mental or physical ailment, and at the same time, it's disputed whether or not there actually were any needle marks, but that's something that I think does need to be.
Yeah, at the time, Daniel had been found 2 days post-mortem, and Nancy would have been found 3 days post-mortem.
Yes.
So the order of the deaths was Nancy died on Friday.
Nancy was killed first on Friday. Chris
Daniel on Saturday, and then Chris committed suicide on Sunday.
Yes.
So the whole time, Chris is living in this house.
Yes.
With not one, but 2 dead bodies, and then then I guess he has a moment of clarity on Sunday, realizes what he did, and well,
from what it's said to believe was that over the weekend, his computer had showed he researched the quickest and easiest way to break a neck, and then had allegedly used a towel around his neck attached to the handle of the machine, which he pulled down using a heavy weight, and then let go, breaking his neck instantly. And then, of course, that's when, obviously the following day. Now, the other things is that a suicide note was
Yeah, I was about to get into that. So
it was not discovered during the initial investigation, but one was later discovered in a Bible among his possessions that was sent to his first wife and their kids in Canada. That had basically been a handwritten note saying, "I'm preparing to leave this earth," which is very rough, and
it's also important to note that after Eddie died, Vicky Guerrero, his wife, as well as Nancy, eventually convinced Chris, who had been bottling up a lot of his emotions and becoming more distant and more aggravated, to start writing essentially a diary, which Chris chose to use that to write letters to Eddie about his emotions and his mind and everything, and that seemed to have helped him for a little while. Because I mean, Eddie died in what, 2005?
I'm trying to remember when he did.
I think you mentioned 2005 earlier.
I can check here. Let me check here. Eddie died in November 2005, so roughly
November 13th, 2005. I remember that.
Essentially, like a year and a half.
I would say a year and 3/4 or whatever. I don't know. Semantics. So yes, Eddie had been living with the grief of having lost his best friend for over a year, and he had been writing letters to Eddie through this diary, and that's how most people started realizing and seeing his true mental state at the time, leading up to the horrendous murders. So, following the murders, we'll get into how WWE reacted to that in a second, but I want to say that following the murders, a memorial was held for Nancy and Daniel that took place in Daytona Beach, Florida on July 14th, 2007, where both were cremated and their ashes placed in starfish-shaped urns for Nancy's family. Chris was also cremated following a private memorial service in Alberta on August 6th, but the fate of his ashes has not been publicly revealed. Out of privacy for the family, and the fact of the matter is, honestly, people are going to be very disrespectful to him. I mean, yes, he did commit these horrendous crimes, and he should be held accountable for it. But I would also like to say that that there are people out there who would disrespect him even further, because while yes, he committed these crimes, it's not at this point, with the information that we've gleaned since 2007 and the 15 years it's been since the murders happened, I won't say it's easier to forgive Chris for what he did, but it's easier to understand why he did what he did. So, if that makes any sense.
I think the biggest reason why, like, a lot of people still respect Chris, not like Chris as a wrestler, not as the person, is
right,
because of that ability to sort of separate a person who played a character from the person themselves. It was just sort of. I think there's very few moments where you can do that, and I mean, I think that, like, even still to this day, there are people who think Chris Benoit is one of the greatest wrestlers that ever lived, but
I will agree.
also the most, like, scum of the earth human being.
I will straight up say from everything I've heard about Chris Benoit as a person is that he was an amazing person.
Yeah, well,
In
he
his
he
own
was an
right. He
amazing
was
person
very
up to that
respected.
point, but
He was very respected by his colleagues,
yes,
and a lot of them were surprised and shocked that he could even have the audacity to do this. So
exactly.
we'll get into some of the reasons or some of the considered give me reasons why he did this here in a moment. But first, I want to dive into how the WWE had reacted to Chris Benoit's um, situation,
Exactly.
for lack of a better term. So on on Monday, um, June 24th or 25th rather, WWE was informed that Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy, and his son Daniel were all um were all deceased at 4:15 p.m. Mere hours before they began airing their scheduled episode of Monday Night Raw. However, following the information coming out at the time, they decided to cancel that night's show and instead do a tribute show to Chris Benoit. Because at that time, all they knew is that he had died. They didn't know the situation or circumstances as to how he died or how his family died. As far as they know, uh, he was killed by some guy breaking into his house. And
Exactly.
they're all grieving. So they decided to do a tribute show. However, about 2/3 of the way through the show, more information started coming out about how there was no signs of break-in, and it was likely a murder suicide, a familicide. So halfway through the show, um, everyone started to realize that why the hell are they doing a tribute show to Chris Benoit when this dude's a monster, right? So, uh, I've always felt bad for WWE because, again, at that time, they didn't know any better what was going on. The only thing that they knew at that time was that Chris Benoit was dead and they needed to honor one of their friends, one of their colleagues, you know?
Yeah.
So, obviously, a lot of the wrestlers started reacting negatively because they're like, what the fuck? Chris is dead? Like, they don't. I mean, when you see someone only a week prior, and next thing you know, they're no longer here on this earth. That's a very, very heavy toll to pay. So, yeah. It's worth mentioning that the night after, when they were going to do ECW, the new taping of ECW, Vince McMahon went on to the show to prior to the show and pretty much said that he apologized for previous guys' episodes, basically saying that due to circumstances we didn't know, and that the only mention of Chris Benoit on this episode is going to be via name. And from that point on, the WWE pretty much tried to erase any connections between their organization and Chris Benoit as more and more information started coming out. So um, at that point, they were just trying to erase history, but the damage was already done. The media started taking the fact that Chris Benoit had apparently gone crazy and killed his entire family and attributed it to steroid rage because in the 90s and going into the 2000s, most WWE superstars and wrestlers at that point were all using body enhancement drugs in order to continue to wrestle. It's worth mentioning that if you're being pushed by the company into a spotlight role on TV, and you disappear for an amount of time, some other guy is going to come up and take that spot from you, and you will have lost all your momentum until you have your great return, and, well, we all know how that goes. So
Yeah.
it's pretty much stressed within the company to continue to perform as much as you can, despite being injured. So the best example of this could be with CM Punk, because it's worth mentioning in 2012, CM Punk was still wrestling with WWE, but he had several undiagnosed concussions, and he was pressured by the doctors that WWE had hired to continue wrestling because of his popularity, to the point that his body was so fucked up that he eventually shit himself on taping a SmackDown during a fight with Dean Ambrose, who is now known as Jon Moxley. So when you take into consideration that WWE's talent and their um, relationship with the company as a whole, as far as health insurance and stuff, you can take a step back and see just how bad things really got with the physical capabilities of some of these wrestlers. For example, the WWE does not have an off season. There is no point during the year where their wrestlers have an opportunity to just stop wrestling altogether for an amount of time to let their bodies recover from the grueling exercises, unlike other sports like the NFL and the NCAA or yeah, just NBA. All these other sport organizations have like this off season to allow their players' bodies to recover, and well, in WWE they never had that. So if you got physically injured while wrestling, you were either out of commission where you had to be recovering for 6 or 7 months, or you were wrestling with a torn tricep or major concussions, which leads us into some of the theories as to why Chris Benoit did what he did. So, the biggest theory about what's going on is, and the most accurate theory so far is CTE. So let me look that up real quick. It's called
CTE
chronic.
is essentially chronic.
I'm trying to explain the acronym so people know what it is. It's chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Essentially, it's major damage to the brain and brainstem. So at the time of the incident, research into chronic traumatic encephalopathy, led by forensic neuropathologist Bennett Omalu and former players of gridiron football, was a fast-growing issue in the sport that had been at the forefront following Dr. Omalu's 2002 report on Pro Football Hall of Fame member Mike Webster done after his death. Subsequent post-mortem analyses of the brains of recently deceased NFL players agreed with the report on Webster's death, as each player showed the kind of brain damage previously seen in people with Alzheimer's disease or dementia, as well as in some retired boxers. Michael Benoit, aka Chris's father, had agreed to have his son's brain analyzed by the same neurosurgeons. On September 5th, 2007, Julian Bales, the chief of neurosurgery at West Virginia University, conducted a news conference in New York City to announce the results of Benoit's postmortem brain examination. And I quote, When the Sports Legacy Institute approached Michael Benoit about testing Chris's brain as part of the Sports Legacy project, our goal was to determine if there was evidence of CTE caused by repeated trauma to the head sustained during Chris Benoit's career. We have now confirmed multiple concussions are part of his medical history, along with clinical symptoms associated with CTE. Because my SLI colleagues and I have found evidence of CTE in the brains of 4 former professional football players, we felt an examination of Chris Benoit's brain may bring awareness to CTE's existence outside of boxers and football players. The findings of CTE in Chris Benoit suggest that there may be a common syndrome among athletes who suffer multiple head injuries in contact sports. For the record, that's the end of the quote, by the way. For the record, according to Chris Jericho, as stated within the documentary series Dark Side of the Ring, it is noted that in the 90s and early 2000s, it was essentially a rite of passage to take an unprotected, point-blank chair shot to your head to progress in wrestling industry. At the time, these chairs were steel. They're steel chairs, and you're literally being slammed on your head repeatedly throughout decades, which is evident to the idea of CTE being prevalent within certain wrestlers from the 90s. Combine that with the amount of testosterone that was being prescribed to Chris Benoit in order to help his body recover from years of steroid abuse. These 2 factors combined could have led to all kinds of mental instabilities and illnesses, to the point that when they were looking at Chris Benoit's brain, they compared his brain to that of an 85-year-old male with severe Alzheimer's or dementia. And for the record, Chris Benoit, I believe, was 38 at this time. Hold on, let me double check. I see. 2000.
Yeah, he was 40.
Yeah, he was 40. He was 40 years old, and he had enough brain injuries for 45 more years of his life. So, so when I say that CTE is probably one of the main causes for his reactions, that's not something to be taken lightly. Granted, CTE does not explain everything that led to Chris Benoit doing what he did. It was to many people, it is pretty much believed that Chris Benoit made the decision, and he acted upon the decision in a right state of mind. However, because of at the time, not many people knew about CTE and his mental health at the time. It is, for the record, I'm not trying to make excuses for why Chris Benoit decided to do what he did. I'm trying to say that it is understandable, and that this could have been prevented in more ways than Chris Benoit could have done so himself. If other people had seen or had an idea of what was going on in his head at the time, they could have taken that opportunity to actually assist Chris Benoit in recovering from the multiple concussions, the countless other injuries that a WWE wrestler faces every single night they wrestle, from even the smallest twisting of ankle to the torn tricep to, as we mentioned earlier with Sabu, a broken freaking neck. So, yeah.
Now, would you like me to go into sort of a theory that I have?
Bring it.
So this is not a theory that was solely my thought, but it was a thought that was created by Hornswoggle, or by the former wrestler known as Hornswoggle. And I want to see if I can find the specific thing as he talked about it. Let me see if I can find it. Okay. So what he had said was that he said this on a video, which it's on the internet as well, that still to this day he doesn't think it happened, and he believes that someone killed Benoit and that there was too much evidence proving evidence wrong. Now, it's never been said what that evidence was, but he also said that nobody saw any changes in Benoit's behavior, rode with him twice and didn't see any difference, and doesn't believe that Chris Benoit was capable of it. Now, this also lines up with somewhat of a theory because of the fact that, additionally, like, if he was in that warped of a mind, you probably wouldn't have your wits about you to understand how to Google search how to break your neck, and at the same time also do that in his state. Now it's possible, but I just think like that would be a little bit off. Now the other thing too is that there was a controversy with Wikipedia.
Wikipedia.
Yes, where
Right. I
now
was actually going to get into that here in a second.
but overall, like I personally, the my personal feelings is that like deep down, I feel like he did do it, but at the same time, like a lot of people were so shocked, a lot of people were so just mortified and thought like that there was no way that Chris could have done these things. And so that for me is also just kind of like a weird kind of crossroads, because it's like universally everyone probably agrees that he did do it, even if there is any evidence that he didn't. But it's been 17 years, or no, it's been 15 years. Sorry. So eventually,
So I'm going to jump in here.
sure.
Personally, I think he did it.
Yeah.
I think
No, I do
more.
too.
There's more evidence pointing to the fact that he did it, from emotional evidence to physical. For example, take the idea of how Daniel passed away. He was found to have enough drugs in his system to sedate him, and before he passed away, to the point where it would make sense that a father would want to ease his son's passing. It would make sense to an extent. Um, it, I there was no signs of break-in in the house, so either if there was someone who did set all this up, they were either so clean that they didn't leave any DNA evidence whatsoever, or they were someone that frequented the house enough to have DNA all over the house, and neither one of those was ever really done. So I will say that there are investigations into other avenues as to if Chris didn't do it. For example, you mentioned the Wikipedia controversy. The Wikipedia controversy pretty much states that on Saturday, well, 14 hours before police discovered the bodies of Benoit and his family, an edit was made onto Chris Benoit's Wikipedia article, explaining his absence from the Vengeance pay-per-view due to the death of his wife Nancy, before anyone really knew what the hell had happened. Essentially, this person had posted on Wikipedia that Nancy had died, and that the reason why Chris didn't show up was because he was grieving her death. However, again, Nancy was announced to have been dead until 14 hours after the post was made. So police started investigating it, and it turned out to be a horrible coincidence with an internet troll.
Yeah.
So yeah. It is also worth mentioning that when looking into the looking into the information on the controversy regarding the post, like looking into where the post was made, and what IP address posted the post, was traced back to Stamford, Connecticut, which is also the location of WWE headquarters. So could someone in WWE have known more than they let on, or was it just some guy in Stamford, Connecticut, who just happened to have mm, uh, who just happened to have made a very poor choice of words when editing a Wikipedia article?
Yeah. I mean that's the other thing too. I don't personally know, and I don't think we ever will know. That's the other thing too. I don't think anyone will ever like truly know personally about any of that. So
Mm. All
eventually
right.
we might, but
Yeah. All right, so now we have the aftermath and the legacy. Now we're gonna pretty much close out this episode. So, in the years following the double murder and suicide, it continued to be referred to in the media. The Great American Bash pay-per-view on July 20th, 2008 was the last WWE pay-per-view with a TV-14 rating. WWE immediately thereafter adopted their current TV PG rating, thus the true beginning of the PG era. So, uh, yeah. Chris Benoit's death was at the very tail end of what is known as the Ruthless Aggression era, which was the era where a lot of the more popular WWE superstars were first introduced. For example, Chavo Guerrero um, and John Cena. And since that pay-per-view in 2008, WWE has been in what is known as the PG era, which has not ended since 2008, where they are taking more precautions about the safety of their wrestlers. Their content is a lot less violent for the most part. It's more centered on comedy and family-friendly bouts of occasional curse words, but I would say it's more of a PG-13 environment. A very soft PG-13 environment nowadays. Um,
practically, yeah. It's very much like centered towards kids, which is why no one really likes WWE anymore.
right. But it's also understandable about their reaction because at the time they were under a lot of controversy and discussion and debate because of their inaction towards treating their wrestlers properly at the time. So here's that. There have also been discussions about whether or not Chris Benoit should ever be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame because of his career, because of his previous career. However, wrestlers such as Stone Cold Steve Austin and Chris Jericho have both stated that Chris Benoit should not be admitted into the Hall of Fame to glorify his actions regarding the deaths of Nancy and Daniel.
So I want to interject on this because this is always a thought that I have had. Again, it kind of teeters on the line of, like, how do you recognize someone for like a good career, even if they were a terrible person? Because like that's something that, the whole like separating the work between the person. I think like they absolutely could, they like because they absolutely could put Chris Benoit into the WWE Hall of Fame. I mean, they did the same with China, and China didn't
didn't murder her family.
Didn't murder her family, but it was still very well known that she had a lot of problems. And also, the issues that happened with her. I'm sure that there's been other wrestlers who have done very questionable.
Yeah.
And
Shawn Michaels for one.
Shawn Michaels. I mean,
Ric Flair.
And those people have been kind of lauded as your Hall of Famers. So
right.
I feel like there's again, like I feel like you could induct him into the WWE Hall of Fame. You would just have to do it in a way without
and you're
addressing
recognizing his character, but you're trying not
like,
to recognize the things he did.
Like if they didn't mention a single thing about him outside of the ring, right? If they just did a package and told everyone in the company, or told whoever's, like posthumously inducting him, do not say a thing about his personal life, do not mention this, do not mention this.
I'll say this much: they should induct Nancy Benoit, because she was also a she was also a member of the WWE before Chris, because she was one of those women who would come out to the ring with wrestlers to help promote wrestlers.
Yeah, she was working with Kevin Sullivan beforehand. Right. But I mean, like that's always a thought that I've just had, because it's like, I mean, even the other day, or not the other day, but a couple weeks ago, like Dark Side of the Ring had the Plane Ride from Hell episode, and everyone blew off essentially, and they're like, "Oh yeah, Ric Flair just acts like this," and I'm like, "Yeah, he's a 2-time Hall of Famer." It's like what he did wasn't okay, but then like don't tell me that like he could do this type of stuff, and even though Chris Benoit did something terrible, y'all are going to whitewash him.
Right.
Now,
anyway,
then again, we're talking about a company that literally the chairman fired his own son, so I don't put anything above them.
Right. Anyway, a couple other things before we close out the episode.
Yeah.
It is worth noting that in July 2013, Sandra Toffaloni, aka Nancy Benoit's sister, said that she believed a blackout caused him to murder her sister. She stated that the medical examiner who examined Benoit's body stated he had only 10 more months to live due to an enlarged heart. Toffaloni also stated that Benoit was contemplating retiring and opening a wrestling school, but decided to continue wrestling due to being in one of the main events at Vengeance for the ECW World Championship. A biopic entitled Crossface was announced in 2011, but was canceled due to a legal dispute with the Benoit family. It was reported that Liev Schreiber, best known for playing the character of Sabretooth and X-Men Origins Wolverine, was slated to appear as Chris Benoit, but again, the film was canceled following a legal dispute with Benoit's family. And of course, if you guys want to learn a little bit more about about who Eddie Guerrero was, about who Chris Benoit was as a wrestler from the voices of the people who knew him the best, which were wrestlers such as Chavo Guerrero, Dean Malenko, Vicky Guerrero, and Chris Benoit, as well as his oldest son David, and Nancy's sister um Sandra Topolini. You can always watch part 1 and part 2 of the Dark Side of the Ring documentary on Tubi TV or on Hulu, which is streaming live now on your normal streaming platforms. That's going to pretty much do it for this episode of Danger Zone. I'm going to turn it over to Tristan in case he has anything else he wants to add to the episode before we end it.
I mean, not really that I can think of in regards to this episode. Again, it's very upsetting what did happen and what did transpire, but at the same time, I hope eventually that we can come together as a wrestling community and recognize Chris the character, Chris the wrestler, just not Chris the person. I think that there's a lot. Oh, go ahead.
I think that we should recognize Chris as a person, but lament what we should recognize that he did a monstrous act at the very end of his life. But we should also acknowledge the fact that there were outside circumstances that caused this to happen, and that for the majority of his life, he wasn't a horrible person. He made one bad decision at the very end of his life, and we should against him.
Sorry for cutting you off there. I think if individual people want to come out and say that, then sure. I think, however, if it's like WWE putting him into the WWE,
WWE should never do that. I don't think I personally think that they should never put him in the Hall of Fame at all.
No, I'm saying that.
What I'm trying to say, Christian, what I'm trying to say is that WWE should acknowledge that he existed and he did wonders for the company in its early days in the early 2000s. But they should also condemn his acts, like what Paul Heyman did during that interview with Inside the Ropes that he did a few years back, where he straight up says that he respected Chris Benoit as a wrestler and a person, but he did not respect Benoit as the monster he eventually became.
Yes.
So, I think that we need to stop ignoring the fact that Chris Benoit existed, because you cannot talk about Eddie Guerrero without talking about Chris Benoit, because their stories are forever linked.
Exactly.
And so, first of all, before we close out the episode, I want to say rest in peace to Nancy and Daniel, because they definitely did not deserve what happened to them. I want to say I want to say to Chris that we are going. I would hope that from now on, wrestling promotions are working harder and more diligently to acknowledge the physical strain and impossible odds that each wrestler goes through on a week-to-week, almost day-to-day basis, and gives them the time they need to actually properly heal. So that something like this doesn't happen again. Obviously, I'm not sticking up for Benoit here. I want to make that perfectly clear that Chris Benoit did something horrible, and he should not be forgiven for the acts that he committed. But I'm also trying to say that if we can prevent something like this from happening, by giving by giving wrestlers who are in similar precarious situations to Chris, that we should give them the opportunities that Chris didn't have. Because as much as it is Chris's fault for committing these unspeakable acts, it is also dependent on WWE for not recognizing that Chris did what he did because of many years of stress and emotional and physical damage to his psyche. So we need to take the lessons that we learned from Chris Benoit, apply them to as many sports as we can, because entertainment is only as fun as the people who are wanting to do it. Now, if it comes down to like AEW and their more extreme wrestling style, from what I've been told, they are more or less the wrestlers who are going to put themselves in that situation, and it is from what I've heard, they do talk about this, and they do say, "Hey, look, I am willing to put my life on the line, and if I do get hurt to that extent, I will take myself off." Because look at what happened with John Moxley. He got very bad with his drinking habits, and his mental health was taking very bad downward spiral, and he took himself off the roster for a couple of months for a few months, just because he needed to recover. So obviously, there's going to be a lot of differing opinions on what's best for wrestlers and pro wrestlers and superstars nowadays. But I want to make sure that it is perfectly clear that that I want to be entertained, but not at the cost of your life or the lives of others. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that does it for this episode of Welcome to the Nightfall. Danger Zone will return next month in April. Hopefully the first week of April, where we will be discussing the Montreal screw job, a very a case that doesn't involve death, but it does involve two major wrestlers that we've talked about previously on the show, on this episode, including Bret the Hitman Hart and Shawn Michaels, as well as the chairman and CEO of World Wrestling Entertainment, Vince McMahon. So we will be talking about the Montreal Screwjob in detail next month in April. Again, if you guys want to listen to our other podcasts, Steel CASKET Underground premieres this Friday on Spotify, in which Mac Advertisement, the voice of Tyler Stroud, has interviewed 1551 co-founder Spencer Crewe, who fans of Richard C. Productions and Shipper will know is the other half of the band 1551, co-founded by Jeremy Dooley. So that episode is coming out on Spotify this Friday. On Sunday, me and Lance at Sussex will be coming to a special second part episode of Through the Breach about the Batman. A sequel episode, part 2, if you will, to this past Monday's episode. So you can expect that this Sunday live on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. You can expect our next episode of Through the Breach, our next mainline episode next Monday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, where we will be talking about the Transformers franchise. And you can join me and other members of the Nightwave cast as we talk about the Black Dahlia murders next Wednesday on Welcome to the Nightfall. My name has been...
I will say I will have a lot of fun talking about the Transformers franchise from the movie aspect, because that is one of my favorite movie franchises of all time.
Alright. I guess you'll be on next Monday's episode. Yay! And then, yeah, my name is Joshua G. Stewart, otherwise known as Callan. You can follow me on Twitter at CallanOfficial, which you can see on top right of your screen. You can follow my friend Tristin here on Twitter as well at TazeTheGod. That's at TAZECHEGOD as in dog. Taze the God on Twitter. You can follow us. You can follow Nightwave Productions on Twitter as well at Nightwave Podcast at the top left of your screen. And if you would like to follow our mainline show, The Satellite, follow us on Twitter at The Satellite Pod. Thank you guys for watching, and wish you guys a good rest of your night, a good rest of your week, and I hope you guys have a good